and welcome to the UNESCO IGCP 637 HerSTONES webinar for Heritage Stone Communication. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the HerSTONES committee for being so generous with funding and allowing me to take on this project. I'm really excited about this. This is my first time giving a webinar to such a broad audience from around the world, and I'm really excited. So the purpose for today, if you might have watched the video that I uploaded to YouTube, which was part 1 of the webinar, but I'll go through for a quick recap in a moment. But the purpose of today's webinar is about the taxonomy, about the classification system for examples of modified geodiversity, which really importantly includes heritage stones. So just to get into it, coming from Hobart, Tasmania. So I'm sitting on the lands of the Muanina people, the Indigenous the custodians of southwest Tasmania in Australia. So this is Tasmania is known as Lutruwita to the Palawa people, the Indigenous Australians, and I'm recording here from land whose sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and it always will be Aboriginal land. Now, as I want to open it up again just into a bit of discussion just for the next few minutes. Yeah, what I want to ask, because I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, and I'm sure everybody has so much knowledge to bring to this seminar. So instead of me just talking about mine, I'd love to hear from all of you. Are there any heritage stones or other sites or features or elements, maybe in your region or that you've visited, that would fall into this category of modified geodiversity? And I'll open it up. I can also go first. I've put a couple of examples up here on the screen. So this one on the top right, if you can see this entranceway, this is actually from my old university. I never knew about its geological significance until recently, so I was excited about this. So this is an example of the Malmesbury bluestone, which is a really interesting type of basalt that originates in Victoria in southeastern Australia. So it has interesting properties geologically speaking, because it can tell us about this specific type of basalt, which is olivine theolite. And it also has very high cultural value due to its use in architecture. There's a lot of it in Melbourne, around Australia, but it's also been shipped internationally as well. So that's one of the sites. That's the only site so far in Australia that has been recognised in the IEGS heritage stone system. The other example I wanted to put up a bit of a different example of modified geodiversity than ones that we might be thinking of or talking about. I want to bring this one up kind of because it is quite strange. This is called Medway Springs in Tasmania, Australia, and it's an interesting geological site. It's a tufa formation, so it is a site that's it's had water which is high in minerals. Those minerals have solidified to make these little formations, which are called tufa. They had got a lot of geologists very excited when they were found, especially in Tasmania, because it's I believe, the only example of tufa formations in the States. So yeah, a really great resource for people to come and study. The interesting part about this site is, and this is where the modified part comes in, is that it wasn't only modified by people, but it was actually accidentally created by people. So this is from I believe some farmland in around central Tasmania, where the underwater the groundwater system, which had been tapped into for irrigation, leaked and leaked for a long time before anybody noticed, long enough for these formations to happen. So this formation was created due to human action, and it has geological significance. And I'm interested in it because it's a strange kind of grey area, because now it's been listed for conservation in the Tasmanian State Geodiversity Conservation System. And it's the first of its kind that was created by people. So for me, this is interesting because it raises the question of natural versus non-natural, or, is it like important because it tells us a bit about geology, even though if not for human interactions, it wouldn't exist at all. Yeah, so I wanted to raise those examples from my area, but yeah, the collective knowledge in this seminar is so much broader than what I have to bring. So I'd really love to hear from anybody if you have any suggestions or any examples. What I can do here so that we can share a bit easier, I'll go back to here. Yeah, so not to put anyone on the spot, but if anybody would like to think of an example of any kind of site that they know of that might fall under the example of modified geodiversity, that definition, would anybody like to share anything?
I think, well, here in Rio Tzigane, as you know, we have a very significant natural geological sites as the Sugarloaf and all the mountains in Rio that were formed during the Gondwana amalgamation stage. So, yeah, one of them is one of the UGS geoheritage sites, Sugarloaf. But if you, I don't know if it's interesting for you to
Yeah.
show it, but if you can put the Google Maps with the relief, I mean, with the, not relief, oh my God, good morning, with the image from Google Maps from the city of Rio de Janeiro, you can see all the quarries that have been explored over the years, over 4,100 years, and you can see the bites on the mountains. Even the Sugarloaf at the base was had some quarries for some time. I think this is a good example, as many of these peaks, hills, and mountains are considered very important from the geoconservation point of view, but they are not really natural, completely natural. Even the Sugarloaf is natural because it has this train, this train. I don't know, do you want to put this Google Maps and see and look at it, or is a little bit, because Rio de Janeiro, the whole coastal area, is a World Heritage Site too. So you can see on the Tijuca Massif, these entrances of the massif, they are all quarries, old quarries. Oh. And some mountains in the center, the center area, have already disappeared, almost disappeared.
So the Park National de Tijuca is a mountain, is a leaf. Yes, yes, it's
a lot of quarries, and you can see it from.
And here. The stone, which kind of rock is it?
Oh, mostly facoidonite and also leptinite, another gneiss.
Ah, yes, yes.
Neoproterozoic gneiss, both of the most important heritage stones here in Rio. So I think this is one example. I imagine, and this happens in all the cities where there are rocky outcrops where rocky outcrops available. But here the bites, the marks are really impressive.
Wow, yeah. That's a
It's
really
an idea.
fantastic example. Thank you.
And I have another one.
Yeah.
Katia could talk about it better. But there is she's working on a project for UNESCO Geopark here in the coastal area of the state of Rio de Janeiro. It's called lagoons and Rio de Janeiro lagoons and cliffs. So, and one of the geosites included in her area is an old salt, very old salt industrial production. It is from the 19th century, and there they have a big ponds to evaporate the salt, to produce the salt.
Yes, Salinas.
And yes, I mean, one of these ponds, there is actually, there are bacteries that are actually producing rocks. And you can see the stones production, stilolites, or I don't know, films being formed actually today, currently. I mean, geologists look at all the stones and say, oh, this was formed by bacteria, or I don't know, bacteria or algae, I think. I'm sorry, I'm not a geologist.
They
But
are
they form
red. They are, you
still,
can see red color on the
yes,
salina. Yes, these are
yes,
bacteria
yes.
working on salt.
I have some picture here. I can
Oh,
look for
yes.
it and send it to you then. But I'm sure, Katia, you can look at the. Let me put
I
here
feel like
the.
I could stop sharing if you would like to
No,
share your
there
screen.
is there is she has a beautiful site. So let me your back here.
Oh, Arawaman. Yeah,
The last one.
found it.
You can see there. It's a great. I think it's a great website. So
Yeah, it's
it's
really
very
great. It's really clear. It's so
so.
much information.
Yeah, and here in the second paragraph, you can see it's, the explanation of a saline, hyposaline system with stromatolites. Yes, I didn't remember the name. I'm sorry. In Portuguese is the same, but so you can see them actually forming, currently forming. It's very interesting.
That is really interesting.
That
Stromatolites.
and it happens on the old salt production site. So
Yeah, so that's a really fascinating intersection of cultural heritage and geoheritage values in one place. So it is, yeah, it's a site of modified geodiversity for sure.
I'm not sure if there are some natural occurrences of these stromatolites forming there, but I think not. I think only there. I should confirm with Katia.
I'd like to just share a couple of quick ones, Ziani, if that's all right. Just want to share the town of Queenstown as a quasi-cultural landscape here in Tasmania. So Queenstown was one of the first places in Tasmania to be mined. And the mining that was conducted here was not conducted with best practice like mines are in Australia now, because we have some sensationally well managed mines in Australia with really strict environmental legislation in places. This was done more than 100 years ago, and so at the time they actually placer mined, and they also mountaintop mined and strip mined every possible place that they could. As a result of that, the quite rare geology of Queenstown, which is a series of VMS deposits, so volcanic massive sulfide deposits. It's also got some some crazy metasediments and some really strange metamorphics there as well. A lot of that was mineralized due to mining and continues to be mineralized. And a lot of the areas around Queenstown are environmentally degraded and are slowly recovering. The interesting outcome of that, though, for the Queenstown people is that the area, that part of Tasmania is very dark. It's got, and many people live down at the bottom of valleys, and they live amongst very thick wooded vegetation with very tall tree canopies, and it rains more than 250 days a year in some of these places. And about 4 meters of rain, which is a lot of rain for Australia. It's in fact one of the wettest places in Australia. And so people in these parts of the country get quite depressed. But they don't get depressed in Queenstown because there's limited vegetation cover. And the result of the mineralisation has actually led to some very stark and beautiful haunting landscapes that have been both geoscientifically interesting to look at the mineralisation process and recovery trajectory for rare geology and the landform shapes that it brings. But it's now an epicenter of landscape art. And there's a festival that occurs there every second year called the Unconformity Festival, which is about art in nature, including in modified places. And so if you just give me one moment to share a screen just for a very quick moment, Zagani.
Yeah.
I'll just show people an example of this area. So this is Queenstown, and this is the landscape. So Tasmania is the birthplace of the green environmental movement. So Queenstown is derided by conservationists as a place that's, suffered terrible environmental tragedy, which it has. There's no doubt about that. But people in Queenstown have enjoyed some of the benefits of this form of landscape, not all benefits, such as acid mine drainage. That's not really something that they love in places. But certainly some of the relic mining landforms and heritage that have occurred there. The denuded landscapes, which actually allows them to have more access to the sun, and some of the interesting features that this has resulted in. Other parts of Tasmania that are surrounding look more like this. They are spectacularly beautiful, and they are in natural condition. They are part of the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. But they're also very cold and dark. So for a lot of Tasmanians who live out in the Western area, the ability to live in Queenstown just gives them something a little bit different. And when they want to get close to nature, they simply drive along the 99 Bend Road just here and go and lose themselves among the trees or in some of the natural geodiversity, like what we can see here in behind Queenstown. So it's a really great juxtaposition between the natural and geocultural landscapes, and challenges the notion that something needs to be beautiful or natural for people to love it.
Thank you so much. That's such an interesting example.
Maybe you could sing also, I remember now, the Rio Tinto River in Spain. Not the Rio Tinto company, but it was explored by Rio Tinto
It's from there,
company.
yeah.
There's a lot of interaction and geo-heritage, cultural heritage, and some interesting case made.
It is an
And
interesting.
Melinda, I think that Rio de Janeiro also fits the description of made about things.
Yeah. Fantastic. These are all some really interesting examples of modified geodiversity of sites that have been created due to human action, and it just really shows how blurred these senses of like natural versus cultural, which in, I know, from my Western European framework, like our ways of thinking in colonial Australia descended from Western Europe, it seems to be very separated, nature versus culture, which it just, when we look at it in reality, it just isn't true. And so breaking down this in conservation, in heritage conservation, is so exciting and it's so important. Now for this next second half of the of this webinar today, I'd like to talk a bit about, we've talked about the issues that communication presents, and we've talked about some of these sites and why they're important. And now I'd like to have a discussion and share some of my research and have a discussion on how can we move forward from this confusion and into something clearer. So what I've done in the chat is that I've uploaded a document, and I'll share my screen so that we can all have a look at it together. I'll share that now. So what I've put in this document is I've put right at the top the modified geodiversity categorization tool. So this was one of the outputs of this research, where I have gone and I've looked at so far just under 750 papers that talk about sites of modified geodiversity. They talk about it with different terms. They talk about a whole wide range of different sites. And so in the below this table, I've put in just some of the data, some of the classification systems that I created with my supervisor, with Dr. Melinda McHenry, to firstly have a look at all of these definitions, all these ways that people are talking about these sites of modified geodiversity and what they mean when they say it. And so this is this first table here. So far I have analyzed 35 of these terms. And what I did was I got together all of the definitions. I also got together all of the examples that people, that authors and researchers are talking about when they talk about sites of modified geodiversity. And what I ended up with was over 1,000 different examples. And I found that they are able to be broken down into these 20 categories of examples of sites of modified geodiversity. So what I've got here, the type of site, the feature classification, which its explanation, some examples, and I also put, just in case you were interested, the number of the examples that were used for each, and so which became the most commonly talked about example. And this part of the classification it's supposed to be subjective, right? Because we have our own different understandings of what each of these sites are. And importantly, for heritage stone conservation and recognition, a heritage stone could fall under any one of these categories, just about. So for example, abandoned and historic sites, building ruins. We've got agriculture and forestry land use, so stones used in terracing, archaeological sites, art, architecture and carvings for obvious reasons, all of those beautiful carvings of these beautiful old buildings. And it's important to note that not all of these sites that people are talking about have heritage value within themselves, and a lot of the time people are not talking about these sites in terms of conservation. So this is a big thing to untangle when we talk about them, and this is what I'll come into when we talk about the definitions and the terminology. Some of the other examples, we've got say, for example, landforms of war, of mining and quarrying, which was by far the most commonly talked about example. So that could refer to anything from historic quarry, or say, so for example, those sites, Nuria, that you were talking about in Rio, those quarrying landforms. Interestingly, sometimes people used terms to talk about modified geodiversity, and they weren't always talking about sites that were modified. Maybe by people, they may have been talking about geological sites that have been modified by other geological processes. But, monuments, burial landforms, artificial caves, bridges, dams. The list could go on, and it has. Sites for tourism and recreation, urbanization, building infrastructure, waste management. So this is one of the sets of background data that I used to create this tool. And in addition to the examples of sites that people are talking about, I also classified their definitions. So in these 35 terms alone, I found 212 different individual definitions. And this is only for those terms that I have analyzed so far. In looking at these terms, I found that authors also refer to other terms either interchangeably or differently. And in total so far, and it doesn't look like an end is in sight, but I've found over 200 terms that describe sites that fall under this umbrella of modified geodiversity. And I just put in this this graphic on the right just to give an example of which are the most common definitions. There were approximately, I believe there's 18 here, which had a relatively consistent definition that was generally agreed upon. And a lot of them overlap, but there are distinct differences, nuances between all of these definitions, which again stem from different cultural backgrounds, different understandings, and different thresholds of modification. So what I've done here is look at some of these definitions which have generally agreed definitions. I analyzed them for the types of sites that they refer to and the type of definition that they generally seem to hold. And what I ended up doing was essentially ranking them in order of how consistent and how relevant they were to the concept of modified geodiversity. So I leave that table here at the bottom. And this is not to say that the other sites are not, the other definitions that may be used less frequently are not important. They are all important. They refer to sites that are incredible. But in terms of clarifying what we're talking about to a broader audience, to people who may not have a background in geoheritage or heritage or geology, how can we communicate? Do we need to maybe narrow it down into one term or a suite of several terms? So for example, here's some more terms that I found which haven't been analyzed yet, which would be really worth looking further into. And I'll just leave those there. But I wanted to show you some of this data and some of these analyses to show just how complicated this has become. So it's an area that is gaining recognition at a very rapid rate, which is excellent. And people are figuring out how do we communicate these sites, how maybe, for example, convince others in the field that this is worth conserving. How do I bring its attention to the general public? How are we going to talk about this when there's there's hundreds of terms to talk about these similar things? So one of the things I'd like to talk about today, going back up to the top here, is this this tool that we've designed, the Modified Geodiversity Categorization tool. And the idea of this is to create a taxonomy for these sites of modified geodiversity. And in reading all of these papers, it's a decision tree. So one of the main things to untangle is when people are using these terms, we need to be clear on whether they're talking about sites that have heritage value or they don't. We need to be clear on whether the sites are, or features or elements, whether they are in situ or whether they've been removed from their original site. And we need to be clear on whether they're built up or whether they've have been created by taking away from the landscape. So, have we added onto the landscape with buildings, or have we taken away from the landscape with... So yeah, this tool is designed as a way to start untangling the really wide range that's out there of terminology and of the types of sites to try and clarify what we mean when we talk about sites of modified geodiversity. So what I'd like to do just for the rest of this session is just to have a look through this. Let's think of some of these sites that we talked about in the first half of this webinar, and see if we can use this trait to find out, could it potentially be a useful tool for communication? And one of the things that I hope can become more clear, especially with regards to the purpose of this webinar, which is to communicate the values of heritage stones, is that they can clearly be classified. So we saw in the table previously that of all of the different types of modified geodiversity that people were talking about, heritage stones could have fallen under any one of those categories. So that was a real catalyst for trying to clarify so that we can communicate those values. So we can say with confidence, when I talk about heritage stones, or when we come to more of a synthesis or more of an agreement on the terminology used, we can clearly say, when I use this term and I refer to heritage stones, people can understand that we're talking about sites that have heritage value, that are more likely than not to be ex situ and to be not intact because they've been tangibly changed in some way by people. So perhaps thinking about some of those sites that we were talking about just before we went on break, would anybody like to have a go or have a chat about whether one site in particular may be able to be classified using this tool? Please stop me or ask any questions if any of it is not clear for any reason, because it's really important, and I'm completely open to feedback, to anything to work towards clarifying all of this. It's really important that it's not only understood by just me, who's been working on it for the last year and a half. I would love to hear if it could be of any use.
Great.
Okay.
Is that a bit better?
Okay.
Oh, did that work? Yeah.
Tsigan, may I speak? I have a question.
Thanks.
So, the word geodiversity has the same connotation, the same meaning connected to the surface of the earth as biodiversity has for the life, for the living, for the life. Biological. Okay, for the bio. And have you made a check also for this word in Google and so on? So it is widely used geodiversity.
Yeah, so is geodiversity a commonly used term in geoheritage or geoconservation studies? In one word, yes, and it's becoming more. Sorry, was I interrupting?
I like a lot this schema that you made here, and the only thing that I didn't understand. Now sorry. Is in the document that you uploaded, there is a word that I never heard, but which has a lot of result in Google, the most of the result in Google, that is geomorphosite.
Ah, yes.
1,900 and more.
Yes.
I never heard it, so I went to understand its meaning in your table. Cultural geomorphosite, geomorphological objects that also have a cultural value. So are all I think, the product of the statues. I don't know, a lot. Okay, I didn't know this this meaning.
Yeah,
I
so
never heard this word.
yeah, so geomorphosite is very interesting, and when I first started doing some research into it, I found that its definition was a lot less stable than geodiversity. I found that
Okay.
many, many, a lot of its references to geomorphosite do refer to um, geodiversity sites or geological sites that also have cultural value. However, I found that there were also a lot of other uses of the term. So it is one of those ones that I think is really, really worth looking into more, and I really hope to um, clarify it more. And I would like to link that back to geodiversity and the use of the word geodiversity. And this is something that Dr. Linda McHenry knows a lot about, as she co-wrote the paper that clarified the term itself.
Okay.
I can see
I
Melinda.
found it. I found it in the documents. Thanks,
Yeah.
Melinda.
That's all right. I was just going to say, one Zagani, yeah, stop calling me doctor. Just call
Okay.
me totally fine. Um,
Okay.
Secondly, yeah, one of the things that we did in 2019 was when people were just using the word geodiversity, we were wondering whether it had just one definition. And so at that time, there were only 300 key papers that were talking about geodiversity. So we read all 300 of them and translated some from Italian and Portuguese and French and Mandarin to see what they were saying about geodiversity. And that's how we were able to say, look, we're fairly confident that the word geodiversity itself is fairly stable, but everything else apart from that gets a bit rubbery. Zagani, I was wanting to ask a question. Where do you think um, uh, the biggest barrier would be if I was interested in nominating a place or trying to use your taxonomy here for something that currently is not recognized in the heritage system? Would I put it in the doesn't possess heritage value, or would I be optimistic and think to myself, it probably could have a heritage value if I was able to tell somebody about it and put it on the left-hand side, put it under that side of the taxonomy?
Yes. Great question. So, um, this is designed to be subjective. So, um, first, according to relevant valorization frameworks, yeah, you're right. If it doesn't necessarily meet criteria for current heritage frameworks, but perhaps it should, then that calls into question of the valorization framework. the other way that you could look at it is by going from the bottom up. So depending on what your site actually is, you could perhaps, yeah, work from the bottom up. And these examples that I've put at the bottom, it's important to note that this is from my understanding. So I don't want to just overlay my own framework of understanding onto those of others. I've put these here as a as an example. So maybe if you have, and that they're not set in stone, as it were. So for example, if you had a watercourse modification, maybe you have a river system that's been modified and it has geoscientific value. In here, it's under the banner of does not possess heritage value, but that's not because it inherently doesn't. That's because from my analyses, I've found that most often when people are talking about watercourse modification with geoscientific value, they're talking about sites that may not have heritage value. That doesn't mean to say that all of them don't. So yeah, please take these examples with a grain of salt and think about the valorization framework that you are looking at and whether that is the framework that suits best, or maybe if there's an issue that needs to be raised within the framework itself to allow for a broader range of conservation. Does that answer your question?
Mm. Mm. I can see Nuria's got a question.
Oh, please.
Yes, I'm sorry. What is the difference for you between decorative stones and heritage stones? That decorative stones are not heritage, or because it's very difficult terminology on stones or rocks. No, Paula, I've been criticized for using the word stones in Portuguese, pedra, and not rock by the geologists that I explained then. Oh,
Yes.
it's in the Bible. It's in the Bible. There were stones. What can I say? Okay, but decorative stones for me, I don't know, because this is because my English is not so good. But decorative stones for me are those to decorate. Some kind of can be on as for to make mosaics or something to decorate. Huh? I understand. Heritage stones can include decorative stones. Cannot?
Can include?
Yeah, I mean, for me, heritage stones is a broader term. It can include decorative stones. It can include ashlar building stones. It can include monoliths also with cultural religion, that you have here as intact.
So everything is modified. Heritage stones are always modified.
Yes, yes. And that's my question. Why you divided? And the other question is that what Paola said. Also the monoliths with religious meanings that you put here, not modified, they are modified. And within time, if they are, there have been conservation actions, they are more modified. I don't know if I explained myself.
Yeah, what you're saying, it makes total sense. And I think this is a really great way where we could map the terminology onto the taxonomy. So maybe I don't want to profess to be any kind of expert in heritage stones. I feel like I'm speaking to a panel of experts on heritage stones. Yeah, so I can tell you my reasoning first was that all of these examples came from a distilled list of examples. So I did find them separate. However, heritage stones do, as you say, they refer to pretty much all of these examples on the left-hand side. So in mapping the taxonomy, mapping the terminology onto the taxonomy, perhaps in one way that we could use this tool to clarify could be to add the terminology into the steps, and heritage stones, instead of being an example, could be the umbrella term for all of these sites. So if it possesses heritage value on the left-hand side of the tree, perhaps that branch needs to be relabeled as heritage stone.
I think the question that was sort of being posed, Zagani, was that there can sometimes be an argument that places that may be deemed to be natural in terms of their physicality could still be considered to be modified once there has been a spiritual or religious significance assigned to them.
Yes,
Absolutely. Even if they're natural in form. In which case I actually don't think that violates your framework, because those sites would therefore have significance, and therefore they possess, we could say they possess some sort of significance value or heritage value. Maybe heritage is not necessarily the right word. Maybe it just needs to be deemed to be significant or important in some way. And so maybe the delineation is it's important, or it has some sort of recognition, whether the recognition is by a group, legislation, a Heritage Act, a Protected Area Act, it's in a geopark, whatever. So the left-hand side, maybe it's recognized in some way, potential for some form of conservation or communicative or interpretive value. And then on the other side, it's just a rock. It's just you tripped over a rock. There it is. It doesn't necessarily have any particular spiritual or religious or cultural or heritage value. It's just a rock. It doesn't mean that it's not important to somebody somewhere, but it's not important in the same way that we might be looking at when we're talking about heritage stones or places that have gone into the World Heritage built environment, architectural beauty, or something like this.
Really interesting. You can definitely see both sides there, and that does raise a really great question for this taxonomy, for communication in general, is what are our distinct, our individual understandings, and how do they affect how we communicate. So yeah, just here we've got two distinct views on the role of intangible value on geodiversity, whether that constitutes modified or not. And that's really great. That's not something I have an answer to, which is really exciting. Would anybody else like to weigh in on this?
I'm just going to encourage Heisa to show her sites. I think they match what Nuri is talking about.
Yeah.
We were talking about, should we mention our sites or not? But maybe we can discuss.
Would you like me to stop sharing my screen?
Because a discussion conclusion. I don't know exactly. The thing is, they are sites inside indigenous communities that were not modified in terms of changing the morphology or the relief or something. But for the indigenous communities, they have a cultural and spiritual significance. Is it modified? or not? Is it, of course, it's geoheritage, but could you call this stone heritage stone? How do you call, sorry, the
Heritage stone.
heritage stone? So can you call this heritage stone or not? But it's definitely a human significance for the indigenous community, but they are not modified as changing anything related to rocks, just natural changing. I will just leave you thinking about this, and then I will search the pictures that I have here to show you.
Yeah, this is such an important point because it is our own different understandings of what is modified, right? So from our conversation, it seems like from Linda, from your own cultural background, that would not constitute modified, but clearly from, as you were saying, Nuria, it would constitute modified. And so it does raise a really important point of like what indeed exactly is a heritage stone. If they've always been modified, does intangible values count? And yeah, I definitely don't want to, discount the opinions that are different from mine. I think it's really exciting that I don't have the answer,
That's nice. We never have the answer when we are researching something, right? You never find, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And the more I do research on this topic, the more I find that there is so much more to to learn. Like it is really amazing how many questions have been raised by, for me, what started off as a small project has definitely snowballed into so many big questions about natural values and cultural values and what is modified and what does that mean for communication. And I would love to say that, hey, cool, we can come to an endpoint on this, but honestly, in reality, I don't think it's possible to come to a fully universally agreed upon understanding. I think what's important is instead that we're aware of everybody else's understanding when we move forward in conservation, that one method may not apply elsewhere. So yeah, I really love this point that's been brought up. And Nuria, you're saying in the chat that your understanding of heritage stones is that they're always modified by humans. And yeah, that is my own understanding as well. But whether that modification is tangible or not, this is a question that is new to me because I, from my own cultural background, have always understood them to be tangibly modified. But I'm learning that that may not be the case. And this raises a big question for this taxonomy and whether or not it could be a useful tool or if it's a useful starting point to talk about other things and create a more useful way forward. So yeah, thank you so much for that input. Anu. Oh, so you're
Can you
asking.
see the screen?
I'm sorry, it's because my connection is going down and up. And I didn't get all the Raisa speaking, but I heard you saying tangible, modified, or I understand Raisa was speaking about indigenous cultures and the spiritual meaning of modified or unmodified geosites. I didn't get it right. But how can something be intangible, modified? I mean, I am relating these terms to the heritage meanings, cultural, tangible cultural sites or intangible cultural sites. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
my English,
No,
I'm not English native, so.
Yeah.
For me, but tangible means transformed. Yes. So heritage stones, a part of also the Petra ruins are transformed, even if they are in situ and not moved, but they are transformed. So heritage stones are always modified, and the modification can be also monolith, I think. Monolith, I don't know the correct pronunciation. Monolith, so Stonehenge, they are modified. They are moved and placed in the vertical way. Even if not, we don't know because it is very complicated, the study of this. And for the rest, if there is no transformation of the site, there is not a road, there is not a path to reach it, because also this is transformation. If the site remain natural as it was 100,000 years ago, it could be this not modified.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
or yes, in this case, we can call it more than a heritage stone. This is a spiritual site, so the name could be a little different because it is not a monument. Yes, it is a monument in a way. I don't know. It's very difficult. In this
Yes,
case,
it is difficult. That's the problem. I love that we're having this discussion and being aware of the surrounding confusion, even though on one level it seems like a very clear thing. I know to me it seems like a very clear thing, but then when I talk to all of you, or when I read online all of these papers, I find that there's so many different understandings that what I think is modified or not modified or natural or not natural is very different.
yeah. Yes.
And so that is, yeah, it's one of the main issues in communication. And what I would like to know from here is there a way forward so that we can make more clear what we are communicating when we are talking about these modified sites that have value? Is it enough to just be aware that there are lots of different understandings and make that clear when we communicate natural value? Melinda, I can see you with your hand up.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say maybe it might be helpful if somebody like Paola could give us an example of one of the listed heritage stones, and then we could take a look at your classification framework here and see whether we could figure out whether we could classify it using this system. Or if somebody else has one that is, a very obvious one that is a heritage stone, it's already been decided. Could we figure out whether this cool tool could identify the category that it should fit in discreetly?
We can think of one of them is most known of all, maybe, is Carrara marble. It's not Paola. For me, is the very, very, very perfect definition of a heritage stone, because it has a cultural value for the whole world, almost. Has been used everywhere for centuries. It holds the history of architecture and important, very well-known architectures. It's a spiritual, many using all the churches, at least Catholic churches, and I think others too.
Yeah.
It has been exported all the world for centuries. It has the importance of their quarries, and where the landscape is heavily transformed, has been heavily transformed because of the quarries. And here they also have the importance of the technology transfer to the whole world. They develop the technology, and they are still transferring technology around there. But I don't know. I think it's the best example of a heritage stone that holds everything. But there are many others. Other sites of heritage stones, like Lalibela in Africa, where churches carved inside the earth on the stone that are almost underground. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great example. So
So could
do you think it would be
be,
possible to, sorry, Melinda, I don't want to.
just going to say, so could it be worked through? They've put, Rosanna's put the spelling of Carrara marble down there. Yeah, where would it fit on the diagram? Where would it go? It would have heritage value, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
I think that we can continue in the next days, months. Each time we approach to something which can be put inside in this diagram. We can take note, add, and then we can exchange opinion on this, because it is
Yeah.
interesting. But always, when you want to categorize everything in a very strict way, it is very difficult, because the elements of the earth, the work of the man results then in so many differences that is very difficult to categorize. Okay, so it is obvious that there are some difficulty, but I like this.
I found that for myself. I found this a helpful tool when I was categorizing, when I was doing all of these analyses for my categorization work with the literature review and the papers that were available then. But whether or not that translates to other areas, other interests, different knowledge backgrounds is a question that I'm really loving the feedback on. Yeah, so we are coming to the end, and I feel like this is a discussion that is like, it's very interesting, and it is very open-ended and subjective, and I really want to thank all of you for your time and your engagement and your patience as we all learn together, because I know I'm very much still learning in this space, and I'm really enjoying learning from all of you, or this evening for me, or this morning for you. And I don't want to keep you past the time, so I just want to say how grateful I am and how lovely it was to meet you all today. And I really look forward to where this conversation could go in the future.